Today we're giving the pronghorns more space to roam when we're redesigning the biggest habitat in the North American area. But before we start the speed build, we'll first quickly remove and edit parts of the current habitat. Now we are left with this chaotic field and we can go on with building. This area has already been changed several times, but that was mostly in the time before I made YouTube videos. In the meantime, I think this habitat has started to look a bit uninteresting, so I wanted to edit it one last time as part of trying to finish this park off, if that ever happens. Part of this area has been used for pronghorns before, then I made it bigger and used it for bison instead. Now I want to have the pronghorns back in here since they're part of the reason I started this zoo in the first place, so I think they deserve a central spot in the park. I did not really have a solid plan for it before I started this redesign. This means I also ended getting a little lost in it sometimes, so the process got a little slow at some point. Therefore I also ended up doing a good part of it off camera. It's a bit easier to test ideas when I don't record it, so I'm sorry for not letting you see the full process. Most of what I didn't record was foliage work and some adjustments various places, but I can explain a bit more about this later. But I think you'll still be able to see how I deal with redesigning my old creations into something that better fits my current skill level, by letting the parts I like stay and deleting what looks a bit outdated or unfitting. Maybe this can inspire you to redo some of your own habitats instead of just starting a new zoo every time you feel like you could do it better. This tended to be an issue for me back in the day, but now I quite enjoy taking a new look at old areas, even though it can be annoying sometimes. Some of the stuff I deleted to build this was among some of the first work I did in this park almost 2 years ago. I had mixed feelings about doing that, but in the end I found it necessary to make this area the best it can be. I kept some details in and I still go with a lot of the same colors and materials, so it still feels somewhat like the same concept. I've redone so much of this park by now that at some point in the process it probably would have made more sense to just start over, but seeing how everything has evolved over time is quite fun actually, and that I know how many hours I've put into this is a quite good motivation. Even though I have felt like giving up on it sometimes, and I've also had longer breaks from it, but giving up no longer feels like an option since I now want to finish this one day. When I started the DRYLANDS, the pronghorns were a big part of the idea behind it. While these are probably my favorite North American ungulate, I did used to find their inclusion in the base game a bit strange. As far as I know, they are not kept in zoos outside of North America, and I don't think a lot of zoos in America managed to breed with them anymore, though information about that is a bit tricky to come by. So considering realism, they're not the most logical choice for a zoo game in my opinion, but anyway, they're very cool animals which I would love to see in real life one day. So back then I decided to give myself a reason to use them. I came by the Living Deserts website and got inspired by that concept, even though this zoo is far from trying to be a recreation of that. Pronghorns have moved a bit around in the park a couple of times and have for a long time been placed in a rather small enclosure opposite of this one. You might already have seen some of that in the beaver video I did recently. It was already possible to connect these two areas under a small bridge, so I decided to just give them access to all of it. This way I can leave out a shelter in the large enclosure to make it appear as a more open, natural landscape, and the small enclosure can also work as a separation area if needed. And what about the bison? For now they're out of the park. If it's going to stay like that is undecided. I gave the central spot back to the pronghorns, and I wasn't really interested in letting them share the habitat as I see a lot of people do in Planet Zoo. It means that I got no place for the bisons to stay at the moment. They do fit well into the concept of the park. My biggest issue with them is just that I don't really like their model very much. And for that reason alone, I am a bit skeptical about putting them back in the zoo. If I end up bringing them back anyway, I think they're going to roam a big open field a bit on the edge of the park, where you can only watch them from a distance. But big open fields tend to not look very good in this game, so I'm not sure if I can make that work. And now let's talk a bit about the foliage in this habitat. Plants and herbivores are always a tricky combination to manage. As I mentioned before, herbivore enclosures in real life tend to hold a limited amount of plants, and if there are plants, then they are often placed where the animals can't get to them. It's all depending on both species of animals and plants, of course. Species which prefer to eat grass might not want to eat from a big bush, or those that mainly eat leaves will not touch the grass. Some species are also more sensitive than others, so they will stay away from certain plants and so on. As I said, it is tricky. But as a ground rule, I try to avoid plants directly in my herbivore habitats, unless I can find evidence that it makes sense for the species I'm building for. Pronghorns don't seem to be picky with what plants they eat, and the pictures of pronghorn exhibits I can find on Google is also very bare looking, besides from some very short grass and dried out bushes and such. I did also try to Google if there are any plants pronghorns were known to leave alone. I came by a website with recommendations for garden plants pronghorns usually would leave alone for people living within their native range. Sadly, I couldn't find any of these plants in the game. So for the most part, I made sure to make the areas around the habitat very green, while leaving the plants out of the places the pronghorns can reach. But the result was just not very satisfying. Plants are after all one of the best ways to make areas look good in this game. So because of all this, I ended up doing a lot of detailing within the habitat without recording it, so I could play around with it without having to consider how to edit it afterwards. First I placed down some Joshua trees with stones around them for protection, but that still wasn't quite enough to bring this area to life. So at some point I just decided to put down a lot of bushes and make a mesh fence around them for protection. I then spent a little time adjusting it all, and in the end I quite like the result. It brings some more color into the habitat, but you'll see all that at the end of the video. Most guest areas around the habitat have also been adjusted to fit better to the redesigned enclosure. I especially like how the area next to the waterfall turned out, where I went with a slope instead of the bridge that used to be here. Other places will undergo more changes another time, since I got a few spots where I might want to add new species later on. I have been planning on getting more content out after the Twilight pack arrived, but the only thing I ended up doing was something for the bats. The plan was a speed build video for this, but it was mostly just a lot of me testing the new exhibit site and playing around with rocks. Instead I turned it into a quick tour video which I submitted to the ongoing contest. I'll put a link to it in the description if you haven't seen it already. The fox, skunk and raccoon will most likely all make it into the park sooner or later, since they can be tied in with the concept of this zoo. But I must admit I got a little fed up with the amount of content I have seen for these species the past weeks, so I didn't really feel so inspired to give it a try myself. And now I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to my channel over time, and of course also those of you who click on that button right now. We have just passed 400, which is kind of crazy. Half a year ago the channel was still below the first 100, and now with a bit of luck and productivity we could maybe hit 500 before the new year. That might be wishful thinking though. So a big thank you to all of you who's here on the channel. And now that we are talking a bit about the channel, I just want to put a few words on the Tapir video I did a few weeks ago. I guess a lot of you might be here because you want to follow the process of the DRYLANDS, and this will probably also be my main focus on the channel for a while. But since there are a lot of very good Planet Zoo speed build video creators out there, I want to occasionally do some content that might be able to stand out a bit more. Which is why I a couple of times now have done videos with a bit more of a constructive criticism point of view, if that makes sense. I don't make these videos to sound like a grumpy old man or for trying to be edgy or anything. I will only cover topics which I feel a big part of the community cares about, to highlight some issues that makes this otherwise brilliant game a little less good. And so far these videos have been among my best on the channel, so I can see there is an audience for it. There also is some kind of an overlap between people who watch these types of videos and those of you who watch my speed builds, like this one, but in the end I don't really know how many of you who enjoys both types of content. It would be nice for me to know what you enjoy the most, if you watch both my speed builds and my criticism videos. So let me know in the comments what type of content you enjoy the most. I totally understand if you only care about what I build and skip the other videos. I appreciate that just as much as if you watched it all. So feel free to just ignore it whenever I end up ranting about something, unless you work at Frontier of course. I guess we got a little off topic there, but I feel like this enclosure pretty much speaks for itself. Not really a lot of tricky things going on here. And of course we got the cinematic shots at the end of the videos, there you can check it all out. But before we get to the end, I just want to point out a blueprint I have used for making this video, or more precisely the overview snaps you saw at the start of the video, and they'll also appear again a bit in the end with the finished enclosure. For this I've used this drone made by ZSHplays. I guess you're probably all familiar with this guy, and otherwise you are missing out on someone with a lot of talent. I'll leave a link in the description to a fun video he made about this drone. From there you can also find a link to the blueprint on the workshop, in case you want to use it yourself. And otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. And now we should be ready with the cinematic shots.